The night I slept in my car with my two children, I made myself one promise. Not a dramatic promise, not the kind you make in movies where the music swells and the character looks at the horizon with determined eyes and the audience understands that everything is about to change. A quiet one. The kind you make at 1 a.m. in a Honda Civic with a 7-year-old asleep across the back seat and a 4-year-old curled against your side when the heat has been off for 20 minutes because you cannot run the engine all night on a quarter. Tank of gas in January in Cincinnati, Ohio. The promise was simply this. This is the last time. My name is Sarah Mallory. I am 38 years old. I own a 3-bedroom house on a quiet street with a maple tree in the front yard that turns the color of fire every October. I want to tell you how far it is from that parking lot to that maple tree. And I want to tell you every step of the distance, because the steps are the whole point. I need to give you the before, because the before matters. I was not always someone whose life had visible edges. There was a time, not long before that parking lot, which is the part that still startles me when I think about it, when I had what looked from the outside like stability. A 2-income household in a rented house in a decent part of Cincinnati. A husband named Marcus who worked in logistics, who I had married at 26 because we wanted the same things and got along well, and because wanting the same things and getting along well seemed, at 26, like sufficient foundation. It was not sufficient foundation. I will not inventory the failure of that marriage in detail, because the details belong to a version of my life I have processed privately and at length, and because the details are not the point. The point is that by the time my daughter Emma was 5 and my son Jacob was 2, Marcus and I had become two people who were making each other worse, slowly and consistently, and the kindest thing we could do was stop. The divorce was not hostile. It was something harder than hostile. It was sad, and sad endings require a particular kind of grieving that anger does not. Marcus moved to Louisville for a job opportunity that required the relocation and that I believe, in my honest moments, he also needed for reasons that had more to do with geography as emotional distance than career advancement. He paid what the court ordered. He called on weekends, which became every other weekend, which became monthly, which became the kind of infrequent contact that a child eventually stops anticipating and starts simply receiving when it arrives. I do not say this with bitterness. I say it because it is the accurate description of the weight I was carrying alone. 2 children, 1 income, and the specific exhaustion of being the only adult in a house where the questions do not stop and the needs do not pause, and the 3 a.m. fears belong entirely to you because there is no one to share the shift with. I was working as an office administrator at a dental practice, 32 hours a week, hourly, no benefits. I had taken the position when Emma was an infant because the hours fit around childcare, and I had not, in the chaos of the years that followed, managed to find the footing to look for something better. When the practice was sold to a corporate dental group in the spring, my position was eliminated in the restructuring. I had 6 weeks of savings. I want you to understand that 6 weeks of savings is not recklessness. 6 weeks of savings is what happens when you are doing the math correctly every month, and the math is simply too tight to produce more than 6 weeks. I was not spending carelessly. I was spending exactly what the budget required and saving what remained. And what remained was not enough. The 6 weeks ran out. We moved in with my mother, which I had hoped would be temporary and which lasted 4 months, and which I am grateful for, and which also nearly broke something important between my mother and me, because 2 adults who love each other and have incompatible approaches to daily life and grief and child rearing, compressed into a 2-bedroom apartment with 2 small children and no timeline, will find the edges of each other eventually. We found them. I left before we could come back from it. I packed what fit in the Honda Civic and I drove away from my mother's apartment on a Wednesday evening in January with Emma in the back and Jacob in his car seat, and no destination that was available to us that night. That was the parking lot night. That was the promise. Want to describe what the days immediately after look like, because I think there is a version of this story that skips from crisis to solution, and in doing so, fails the people who are currently in the crisis and need to know that the in-between is survivable. The in-between is survivable. Day 2. I called 211, which is the social services referral line, from the parking lot of a McDonald's where the kids were eating breakfast on $4 I had in cash. The operator was patient and thorough and gave me 3 shelter options. 2 had no availability. The third had a family room that would be available in 2 days. We spent 2 nights in that parking lot. I am not going to minimize what those 2 nights cost me internally. I am a mother. I am supposed to provide walls and heat and the particular safety of a home. Sitting in a running car counting down how long I could run it before the tank ran empty while my children slept was a specific kind of failure that I experienced in my body before I experienced it in my mind. But I also made phone calls those 2 nights. I charged my phone at McDonald's. I called every number the 211 operator had given me. I applied for emergency assistance through 2 county programs. I called a woman named Diane at a family resource center whose number I found on a flyer in the McDonald's bathroom and who answered on the 3rd ring at 8 p.m. on a Thursday and stayed on the phone with me for 45 minutes and helped me build a list of next steps that had a shape I could hold. Diane changed things. Not because she gave me anything material that night. The material things came later, through the programs she connected me to, but because she treated me like a person who was in a difficult situation rather than a person who was defined by it. That distinction in those 2 nights was the difference between feeling lost and feeling behind. Being behind is fixable. Loss is a different problem entirely. The shelter was not what I had feared, which I say because I had feared it and I think. That fear keeps people from calling 211. And I want to name it directly. It was clean. It had structure, meal times, quiet hours, shared bathrooms, a common room where children watched movies in the evenings. It was not spacious or private or anything close to what I wanted for my children. But it was warm and it was safe, and the women who worked there treated us with a matter-of-fact dignity that asked nothing from me in return. Emma knew something was different. 7-year-olds understand more than you think they do, and less than adults fear. She knew we were staying somewhere that was not home. She did not know the financial specifics. She adapted with the practical flexibility of a child who has a mother she trusts, which told me something about what the previous years had built between us even in their difficulty. Jacob was 4. He found a toy fire truck in the common room on the first day and considered the situation largely resolved. The next 4 months were the most structurally demanding of my life. Not emotionally. Emotionally, the parking lot nights were harder. But structurally, in terms of the number of simultaneous problems that required simultaneous solutions, the shelter months were a complexity I had not previously encountered. I needed housing. To get housing, I needed income. To get income, I needed employment. To get employment, I needed child care. To get child care, I needed the child care subsidy program, which required documentation I had to gather, which required time I had to carve. Out of days that were already fully allocated, every piece depended on another piece. It was a puzzle where you could not place any piece until the surrounding pieces were in position, except that all the surrounding pieces were also waiting on other pieces, and the whole thing was timed. I worked on the puzzle. I am being brief about this because the details of navigating social services systems are specific to place and time and less useful to you than the principle, which is this. The systems exist, they are imperfect and sometimes slow and occasionally maddening. And they are navigable if you treat navigation as your job. I treated it as my job. I made calls every morning after the kids were at the shelter's child care program. I kept a notebook, physical, paper, with every program, every contact name, every deadline, every document required. I followed up on things that had not moved. I asked Diane, who had become a consistent presence in my navigation, which questions to ask and which offices to contact directly and when to escalate. The child care subsidy came through in week 3. The employment came in week 5, an administrative coordinator position at a nonprofit, full-time with benefits, at a salary that was not large but was real and consistent, and came with health insurance for all 3 of us, which I had not had for 2 years. The housing took longer. I want to talk about housing because it is the chapter that required the most patience and the most faith in a process I could not always see working. I had been placed on a wait list for an affordable housing program, a rent-subsidized unit through a county housing authority, before we left the shelter. The wait was estimated at 4 to 6 months. We left the shelter at month 2 for a transitional housing program, which was a step, a real step, an apartment, walls, a door that was ours, and we lived there for 7 months while the wait list moved. The unit came available on a Thursday afternoon call that I took in a bathroom stall at work because I could not wait until lunch and I needed a moment of private reaction before I walked back to my desk. I stood in that bathroom stall and I did not cry, which surprised me. What I felt instead was something quieter than crying. A stillness. The specific stillness of a thing you have been holding in tension for a very long time, finally resolving. I called Emma's school from my car at lunch and asked if I could come in at pickup and share something with her. Her teacher let us use the small conference room off the main office. Emma came in with her backpack on and her jacket half-zipped the way she always wore it, and I told her we had a home. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "A real one?" I said, "A real one, Dee." Sat down in the chair across from me and said, "Okay," with the exhale of someone putting down something heavy. She had been carrying it too. Of course she had. The apartment was the beginning of the stable chapter, which is its own kind of adjustment that does not get discussed enough. When you have been managing a crisis for long enough, stability feels unfamiliar before it feels like relief. There is a period of waiting for the other shoe, of not fully trusting the floor beneath you, of waking at 3 a.m. out of habit even when the 3 a.m. fear no longer has a specific object. That period passes. It has been over 8 months, and what replaced it was something I had not felt in so long that I almost did not recognize it when it arrived. Ordinary life. Emma doing homework at the kitchen table. Jacob is learning to ride a bike in the parking lot. Dinner that I cooked. In my own kitchen, nothing remarkable. Pasta and salad and a child complaining about the salad. And the unremarkable ordinariness of it landing with a weight that I had to excuse myself to the bathroom for because the gratitude was too large for the kitchen. I worked. I was saved. I took a financial literacy course through the nonprofit, where I worked, which offered it to staff, and which I had walked past the flyer for 3 times before I finally walked in. The course changed how I understood money, not dramatically, not through any secret I had not heard before, but by giving the concepts I knew abstractly a practical structure I could apply to my specific situation. I opened a savings account, designated specifically for a future down payment. I contributed to it every month. Not a large amount, a real amount. The amount the budget allowed after everything the budget required. I did not touch it. I did this for 3 years. The homeownership counseling program was through a nonprofit that partnered with the county housing authority. 8 weeks, Saturday mornings, a conference room with bad coffee and good information. A counselor named Robert who had been doing this work for 22 years and had the specific warmth of someone who genuinely believes in what they are doing and has seen enough outcomes to have evidence for the belief. Robert reviewed my finances. He looked at 3 years of saved statements, my credit report, which I had been rebuilding for 4 years through a secured card and consistent on-time payments, and my current income and expenses. He said, "Sarah, you're closer than you think." I said I had heard that before from people who turned out to be optimists. He said, "I'm not an optimist, I'm a numbers person. Look at the numbers." I looked at the numbers. He was right. The house on Maplewood Street had been on the market. For 31 days when my offer was accepted, 3 bedrooms, a yard that needed work and that I had budgeted for over time, a kitchen with a window above the sink that faced east, which meant morning light, which had been on a list I had written and revised and carried for 3 years of what I wanted, a home to look like when I finally had one. I closed on a Tuesday in October. The closing took 45 minutes, which seemed insufficient for the weight of the occasion. I signed my name in 17 places, and the attorney said congratulations and handed me 2 keys on a plain ring. I sat in the parking lot of the title company for 10 minutes before driving to pick up the kids. The first night in the house, we did not have furniture. We had sleeping bags and pillows and a pizza, and the 3 of us sat on the floor of the living room and ate, and Emma said it echoed when she talked, which it did, because the rooms were empty. Jacob ran from one end of the house to the other approximately 11 times. We slept on the floor in sleeping bags, all 3 of us in the biggest bedroom, because it was our first night and I wanted us together. I lay awake after they were asleep and I looked at the ceiling of my own house. My name was on the deed. My children were asleep in a home that belonged to us, the maple tree in the front yard. I had not known yet that it turned the color of fire in October. I would discover that the following autumn was outside the window, and the October light came through at an angle that put shadows on the ceiling that moved very slightly in the wind. I watched those shadows for a long time. I thought about the parking lot, about the promise, about Diane and Robert and the notebook and the savings account and the bathroom stall call and Emma's exhale in the small conference room, about Jacob and the toy fire truck, about all the ordinary Tuesday dinners that had been so hard to get, too, and were now simply mine. I did not make a speech to the ceiling. I just said, quietly, to no one and to everything, we made it. The maple tree turns the color of fire every October. This is the 3rd October I have watched it from the front porch. Emma is 11 now. She is doing a school project on marine biology. Jacob is 8 and has opinions about everything and is exhausting in the specific, wonderful way of 8-year-old boys who are secure enough to have opinions about everything. I was promoted at work last spring. I am the program director now, which means I spend a meaningful portion of my days helping people navigate the same systems that Diane helped me navigate, which is not a coincidence. I think about the parking lot sometimes, not with the weight it used to carry, but with a specific respect for what it was, the lowest point of a floor I had not chosen and a night that required a promise I intended to keep. I kept it. The floor is solid now. I built it myself, plank by plank, on a foundation of 2 sleeping children and 1 quiet promise, and the complete unwillingness to let that parking lot be the final word on what our life looked like. It was not the final word. This is subscribe.